I'm Gabby. I'm a bird enthusiast living in Bristol, and I'm making this video so that you can find out my top 5 things that I bring with me when I visit Skomer Island, and also as a reminder for myself for my upcoming visit. Every year between April and July, puffins fly over to the UK onto different islands and areas of the coast, and they find a mate. They create little nests within these hobbit hole type structures, and they also are there to raise a chick, which is adorably called a puffling. Puffins are quite quirky little birds. They're a lot smaller than you'd expect when you see them in person, maybe about sort of this big, and they are very characterful. They're called clowns of the sea because of their vibrant beaks, which they get during the mating season. But most of all, I really enjoy watching them waddle around on the paths when you're on these islands, and also when they fly above. If you live across the UK, there's a variety of different places where you can go to see puffins. One great place if you live in the southwest of England is Pembrokeshire. In Pembrokeshire, just off the coast, you have this island called Skomer, where they have tens of thousands of puffins that arrive every year to mate. You can choose a variety of different ways in which you want to experience the visit of the puffins. You can have a little cruise around the island, or you can have a Skomer landing, which is where you pay for a ferry across and they drop you there for 5 hours, and you have to be at a specific point where they'll come and pick you up and take you back to the mainland. I'll put a link below in the description of the company that runs that ferry. It is about £40, but that covers travel there and back, and I believe also that some of the money goes towards nurturing the birds and keeping it a really great conservation site. So I'm going to share the 5 key things that you can't forget in your bag when you visit Skomer Island. The first thing that I definitely recommend packing is wet weather gear. You are going to be on a wild island, exposed to the elements, and you want to be as prepared as possible. So make sure you bring a raincoat, waterproof trousers, and make sure it's all sort of re-waterproofed, and some really sturdy boots as well, because you're going to be walking for 5 hours, there's not much shelter, and you don't want to get wet and miserable in the first few minutes of being there. If there's extreme weather, they will cancel the ferries. I think they have a Twitter account which you can monitor every morning and check before you drive down to the ferry landing site. But if it's just cold, wet or rainy, the ferries obviously will still go ahead, so just make sure you're prepared. I would also say when we went it was really cold and rainy, but apparently that's when puffins love it the most, so you get the payoff of being cold and wet, but you do get to see more of the puffins enjoying the weather. I'd also say make sure that you have either sort of a buff that you can pull up around your neck, or that your raincoat hood has some toggles on it so that you can pull it in tighter just to give your face a bit more protection. And make sure you check the weather before you go, because as with any British weather forecast, you can get all seasons in one day, and you want to make sure that you also bring some sun cream or sunglasses as well, just in case. As with going into any nature reserve or sort of wild area, you want to make sure that the only thing you leave behind are footprints. As Skomer is a wild island, there obviously aren't many bins or rubbish collection facilities around, so you want to make sure that any waste that you create you take with you. So make sure you bring some rubbish bags or plastic bags or paper bags, something in which you can store any wrappers or fruit peels in your backpack, also keeping your camera and any other gear you're taking protected. It's also helpful to bring something like a waterproof rubbish bag as well, because it means that you could, in the scenarios where it is needed, get creative, using it to protect your camera or using it to cover part of your body if you realise that your waterproofs aren't as waterproof as you thought. Of course, another item that I think is essential to take with me, as I'm really into bird photography and bird painting, is my camera. So always work with what you have, whether that's a phone camera, a GoPro or a DSLR. I'd recommend, if you are taking something like a phone camera, just making sure that you have some kind of waterproof casing. You can get some quite cheap online that are even immersible in water, which could be helpful for your next trip. You definitely want to capture the moments when you're on the island, because there'll be so many instances where a puffin will approach you and maybe you want to take a nice photo of it, even just seeing the beautiful cliffs and the landscape around you. Last year I took my trusty DSLR that I'm recording on now, so unfortunately can't show you. It was in the early stages of being interested in birds, so I didn't have the right kind of equipment. I didn't want to invest in something before I knew that I was really keen on it. So I went with the current lens and setup that I have now. But this year, as obviously I've been doing a few more trips and doing a lot more bird spotting, I'm really excited to be going with a slightly improved lens. I was lucky enough to upgrade my equipment before I headed off to New Zealand, so I kept the same camera body, but I upgraded my lens to something that was a little bit more appropriate for bird photography. I visited a second-hand camera equipment shop, and they were really helpful in advising the next step up in terms of lenses, so I was able to get something that was second-hand, affordable, but gave me that little bit better quality. This is the lens I will be taking with me on my next trip. It's a 45 to 175mm lens, and it'll mean that I just get that little bit closer to the birds, and my photos will hopefully be an improvement on what I took last year. Following on from that last one, obviously if you are taking any electronic devices, what I would recommend is bringing spare batteries. You're gonna potentially be camping overnight, and obviously when you're on the wild island itself, there's not going to be much opportunity to charge your phone or your camera. So make sure that you bring extra batteries with you that are fully charged so that you can continue going about your day, continue taking photos without worrying when your battery's going to run out. So I always bring at least one extra battery and a power bank as well in my backpack. The next item that I would recommend taking is a little bit heavier, but it's definitely worth it, especially if you're going with someone else. So I have these binoculars that I was very luckily gifted a few years ago. So I bring these along because my partner isn't really into photography, but he often accompanies me on the little birding adventures we do. So I like handing these over to him so that he can have a closer look at whatever I'm seeing through the viewfinder. We can have that shared experience together. But they just mean that really easily, if you see something in the distance, maybe you're walking around and you think you might see a seal among the clusters of rock along the coastline, you can just quickly pick these up and have a look a bit closer. These came in really handy when we were walking along the coastline and we saw something moving along the rocks, and we ended up recognising that they were seals just kind of bobbing about in the water, but we wouldn't have been able to see them as we were so high up on the cliffs otherwise if we hadn't had to. Last time we were there, I think we saw razorbills and oyster catchers, and obviously if you're really far away or if you've forgotten your glasses, it's a little bit harder to ID them, whereas if you've got some binoculars, they come in very handy. A bonus item that I would recommend bringing are snacks. So obviously you're supposed to bring your lunch along with you because you're spending 5 hours out in the wild and there's not much shelter, there's nowhere to really buy food. So bringing along a really good lunch, bringing along some snack bars, some fruit is really handy, but you just have to make sure, as I said before, that any wrappings or fruit peels you take with you. So those are all my tips. The 5 essential items plus a bonus one that I definitely recommend bringing and putting in your backpack when you go to Skomer Island. I will definitely be packing those on my upcoming trip. I'd also recommend having a read through and studying a bit more about the birds and the people who conserve the island before you go, just so that you get the full benefit when you visit. I've got a really handy book, a nice RSPB book that covers all of the birds in the UK, and you get all sorts of facts, distribution maps, and it's just really helpful at answering any questions that you might have, as well as giving you some facts that might be helpful for future pub quizzes. I remember my first trip to Skomer, and I think it's one of the feelings that I will never forget when you're pulling into the island, into the cove on the ferry, and there are puffins bobbing in the water all around you, soaring overhead, and you just get fully immersed in the experience and just able to admire these beautiful birds and all of the work that's gone into conserving them. So whenever you're going, have an excellent trip. I will try and link as many of the items in the description below as possible so that you can find them easily. I'm obviously still very early on in my bird watching and painting and photography journey, so please leave a like on the video if any of this has been helpful. That gives me a good idea as to whether it's worth making these. If there's anything key that you feel like I've missed that I should bring with me next time, please let me know in the comments, as I'd love to add more things to my essential list. I know I'm definitely going to be referring back to this when I'm packing for my next trip, just to make sure that I've got the key essentials. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.